He related a lot of stories about Sherman. Some of them were not that great of stories. In other words, good. They showed the darker side. But many of them, he was genuinely a rather nice, funny guy. He was nothing in real life, according to this guy. He was nothing. The real life Sherman Hemsley was nothing like the character of George Jefferson. I mean, he said Sherman was a beautiful person. Sherman Hemsley was also, according to him, was also gay. But that's okay. He made us laugh. And he was in a couple of other TV shows after that. I don't think any of them were as successful and long running as the Jeffersons, but he had another successful. What was it? Amen. Didn't he play a priest or a preacher in that one? I think so. I didn't watch it too often though. But I just didn't particularly like the show, but it didn't mean that the show wasn't successful because it was on for a few seasons. But we know the real Barack Obama now. We can't say that we don't. We saw him. We saw him. We saw him in action. I mean, to get, on foreign policy and as far as our military is concerned, to give an answer to Mitt Romney's, well, we have fewer ships in the Navy today than we had in 1916. And to say that the reason is because they're more advanced. We have, well, you can say, well, the reason why, Governor, that we have fewer ships in our Navy in active duty today is because today's ships are bigger and more advanced than the ships of 1916. Needed more ships to do the same thing. So you needed more ships back then that one ship can do today. Hey, if you wanted to refute that claim about what Romney said, that's legitimate. But that's not what he did. He said, we now have things called aircraft carriers. Well, you know what? And we got ships and it's that go underwater. A submarine is not called a ship. A submarine is called a boat, Mr. President, for one. Two, just because we have more advanced warfare technology does not mean that the rest of the world does not either. And so when you put up a highly advanced destroyer against, another destroyer that's not as advanced, 1-on-1, fine. Maybe 2-on-1, fine. But China's building to have their Navy 5-on-1 to ours. In fact, our Navy has decided to change the distribution of our naval fleet. Within the next 4 years, Mr. President, next 6 years, Mr. President, the Navy is going to move ships from the Atlantic fleet and put it in the Pacific fleet. So we'll have a balance of 60% of our Navy military power in the Pacific versus only 40% in the Atlantic. Why is that? Because they need more ships. But instead of understanding that, which Obama doesn't, but I believe Romney does, this is the answer that we get from Barack Hussein Obama.
But I think Governor Romney maybe hasn't spent enough time looking at how our military works. You mentioned the Navy, for example, and that we have fewer ships than we did in 1916. Well, Governor, we also have fewer horses and bayonets because the nature of our military has changed. We have these things called aircraft carriers where planes land on them. We have these ships that go underwater, nuclear submarines. And so the question is not a game of battleship where we're counting ships. It's what are our capabilities? And so when
we're still counting like Battleship. where we're counting ships. And the reason why we have fewer bayonets is because we have fewer people, fewer soldiers than we used to. Because they still use the bayonet, by the way, Mr. President, in case you didn't know. Yeah, just in case you didn't know, hey, obviously you did know, they still use them. And they were used in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we still have, we don't have as many, but we still have, cavalry that actually rides horses. We have soldiers that ride horses. They had to in Afghanistan. They still do. And if we're ever going to fight wars in countries like Afghanistan, well, yeah, we're going to have to use a horse every now and then. Because you can't get everywhere with an Abrams tank, and you can't get everywhere even with a Humvee or the new vehicle that'll eventually replace the Humvee. They can't go everywhere that a horse can go. So I'm just, the point is, it was an arrogant, mean, nasty, snarky reply. Trying to make the governor seem like some idiotic nincompoop that doesn't understand the military. I believe Romney fully understands the military. Yeah, Mr. President, I fully understand that we use fewer bayonets because we have fewer personnel that would use them. And I fully recognize the fact that we have boats that go underwater that are called nuclear submarines. And I fully understand that we have these very large ships that planes can actually land and take off from that we call aircraft carriers. But you see, Mr. President, some of our enemies have the exact same tools that we do. And some of our enemies may be trying to build more to outnumber ours so that there will be an imbalance. And we don't want there to be an imbalance, Mr. President. We want to maintain military superiority. Because nobody ever attacks a superior force ever. Well, let me rephrase that so you fully understand it. Nobody ever knowingly attacks a superior force. They attack another force when they believe they have the superiority in some way or another. Or they believe that there will not be a retaliation. So, Al-Qaeda and all those other terrorist groups, they fully understand that U.S. has superior military firepower, but they don't believe, especially under this guy, that he's going to use that power to retaliate. And so far, he really hasn't. Well, Afghanistan, man. Okay, but, he's pulling out before the job's done. It's our longest lasting war, Rod. This is longer than in Vietnam even. No, I fully understand that. And the point is that if we're going to go in there, you might as well do the job that you went in there to do, complete it and get out. Not leave before the job is done. Because then you just end up with a vacuum, like Libya, a power vacuum, and then look what happens. But it's just plain as day who this guy really is. I mean, he has never, I don't believe, look, he has never been attacked and challenged the way he has been this political season. I don't believe Barack Obama is used to that. Which is why he's getting angry and getting snarky. And just glare. He's trying to intimidate. And the big thing is that Romney didn't play along with the intimidation tactic of the stare thing. I never understood. You watch a boxing match. Beginning of the boxing match, you got these two guys. They're staring at each other. How is a stare going to intimidate? People do that to me, and I laugh. And you know what? I mean, I would. I remember one time in a college debate when I was running for college student body president. Now, I didn't win the election, but I went during a debate. It was another person that got even fewer votes than I did. They came in. How many of candidates were there? One. I came in second out of 5 or 6 candidates, but I remember one of the lower rung candidates. She just kept staring at me. I mean, just trying to stare me down. And finally, I just looked at her and said, I see you like to stare. I have a cat, and I always win the stare. But, at this particular point, I'm not sure if your staring tactic is to try to intimidate me or if you're just being childish or trying to act like a cat. And the entire crowd, as big as it was, erupted in laughter. It was the last time I had to deal with that. I mean, it's dumb. When you have nothing to go on, you're going to try to use intimidate. You're talking about a guy who's trying to be president of the United States, who's built a company, who's made millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, and you're going to try to intimidate him? What kind of childish nonsense is that? That just goes to show who he is. He's a man-child. He still thinks he's on the playground somewhere. Maybe I don't know. Maybe him and his Choom gang from Ohio. I don't think he's really fully grown up because there is a documentary on PBS about Obama and Romney, and one of the things that they talked about Obama is that he tried to reestablish the Choom gang when he left Ohio and went to college at Occidental. And then he tried to figure out who he was. He immersed himself in black culture. Obama didn't know who he was. He'd only seen his father 3 times in his life, but he wrote a book about him. He had an identity crisis. He wasn't sure who he was. He wasn't accepted by whites because he wasn't white enough. He wasn't accepted by blacks because he wasn't black enough. He didn't know who he was. He was a lost child. It's a bunch of crock. Well, it didn't matter if he knew who he was or not. It's obvious that he knew who he wanted to be. And he thought he was smart enough and great enough to be what he wanted to be. And on his way to becoming who he wanted to be, this sense of grandeur and arrogance embedded itself in his persona. And he's been that way ever since. He's just an arrogant boob. I don't know what else you could possibly say about this guy. The fact is that, he's, as I said before, when you're president, every president has a slight air of arrogance about that. Every modern president, anyway. I mean, they're the president. It's expected. You know what's going to happen. He's the number one guy, most powerful person in the most powerful position of the most powerful country on the planet. Yeah, you're going to have a guy who's got to be a little bit arrogant. George W. Bush was a little bit arrogant as president. just goes along with it. And I think if because Romney's not arrogant at all, but I bet you once he gets in that White House,